Tim O'Reilly's book, What's the Future?, is an overview of business, technology, and society. As the founder of O'Reilly Media, Tim has been steeped in technology trends for the last 40 years. From his vantage point running conferences and publishing technical content, Tim has been able to make informed predictions about what is coming next. In today's conversation, Tim gave his perspective on how artificial intelligence will impact our world in the coming decades. More importantly, Tim emphasizes the role of human agency. The future is not something that merely happens to us as we sit back and eat popcorn. Today, we make decisions, and those decisions could help make our technology utopia or contribute to the fall of our great technological empire. On the subject of business, Tim gave a radically different perspective than some of the entrepreneurs that have come on Software Engineering Daily. In our conversation, he raised the question of why entrepreneurs raise massive amounts of money and get on the treadmill of startup hype and build a company around negative cash flows. For that model, the only possible outcomes are going public or being acquired or flaming out completely. O'Reilly Media has been cash flow positive since the beginning, and the company has steadily compounded, growing successively bigger businesses, from publishing to conferences to online learning. This episode gave me a lot to think about, just as the O'Reilly conferences have given me a lot to think about throughout the years. O'Reilly Media has graciously partnered with SE Daily since we were very small, since 3 years ago. So I have great admiration and appreciation for the company and Tim O'Reilly himself. It was a real pleasure and an honor to get to meet him in person. Before we get started, I want to mention that we're hiring. Our hiring positions include writers and a researcher and a videographer, and you can find these positions along with other jobs at softwareengineeringdaily.com/jobs. Some of these are part-time roles, some are full-time, and if you yourself are hiring, you can also post on our job board. It's easy and free, and we'll be sharing some of the job postings with our listeners. Just go to softwareengineeringdaily.com/jobs and you can see how to post a job. Every team has its own software, and every team has specific questions about that internal software. Stack Overflow for Teams is a private, secure home for your team's questions and answers. No more digging through stale wikis and lost emails. Give your team back the time it needs to build better products. Your engineering team already knows and loves Stack Overflow. They don't need another tool that they won't use. Get everything that 50 million people already love about Stack Overflow in a private, secure environment with Stack Overflow for Teams. Try it today with your first 14 days free. Go to s.tk/daily. Stack Overflow for Teams gives your team the answers they need to be productive, with the same interface that Stack Overflow users are familiar with. Go to s.tk/daily to try it today with your first 14 days free. Thank you, Stack Overflow for Teams. All right, well, Tim O'Reilly, you are the founder of O'Reilly Media. Thanks for coming on Software Engineering Daily.
I'm glad to be here.
Your book, WTF, it's about WTF technologies. These are things like augmented reality, artificial intelligence, on-demand services. It's been a year since you published WTF. Out of these topics, which we're going to explore, what are the things that you've changed your mind about?
You know, that's a very good question. I think that if I were to spend more time, if I were to rewrite the book now, I would probably put a little more emphasis on genetic engineering. You know, I stayed away from it mainly because it's not really my field. But I do think that when we think about the 21st century, there's going to be a huge amount there.
How long till we have an O'Reilly conference dedicated to genetic engineering?
Well, we've actually taken a run at it 2 or 3 times. We did a bioinformatics conference back in 2001, and we ran that for a number of years. And we have our science foo camp, which is basically an unconference that we do every year. We've been doing that since 2004. In fact, it's this weekend down at Google X.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, one contrast I see to your book is the Kevin Kelly book, The Inevitable, where he talks a lot about the same trends that you explore, but he describes it in this position of inevitability, whereas I see your book as more about the human agency involved in these technologies. How do you contrast the role of human agency versus the positioning of these technologies as being inevitabilities?
I think it in some ways goes back to this disagreement I had many years ago with Ray Kurzweil, where he would draw these graphs and say, well, look, progress goes up and to the right. And I said, well, yeah, from a distance, sure. But, if you look, for example, at architecture, the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul was for 1,000 years the largest building in the world because we lost the knowledge of how to build something like that. And so you could have on human timescales, an immense slowing down or reversal of progress. So I think part of what we need to understand is that, first of all, nothing is inevitable. I think that we face enormous discontinuities. And anyone who looks at history will see those even in human time frames, where there were great empires that fell, where there were civilizations that collapsed. And I don't see any reason why ours might not be among them. In fact, I think it's more likely than not that ours will be among them. And so the notion of progress is also something that I think is profoundly suspect. Are we really more advanced? If you think about adaptation to the environment, maybe humans are not so very advanced after all. We've kind of destroying our environment in 10,000 years of our rise. And will we effectively foul our nest sufficiently that we won't be able to continue to prosper? So I think I like to focus, yes, there are long-term trends that have momentum, that have a powerful vector behind them. But that doesn't mean that they're inevitable because, first of all, there are other intersecting vectors. And it's sort of interesting. One of the set of people I've invited to our science food camp event are a couple of scholars who have been researching the interaction between climate change and the fall of civilizations. Both of them there's a group at Harvard that has basically done ice cores in Greenland, and it's just basically correlated historical events through Roman and early medieval civilization with climate change events. We have also one of the other people that's done a lot of study of the fall of ancient Aegean civilizations, and again looking at the combination of climate change, triggering a disease, and then triggering migration, triggering warfare, and that kind of being this toxic stew that brings civilizations to an end. And we're about to face one of those kinds of events. And so, part of the hopeful part of my book, though, is really that if we look at the big technology systems we're building, they teach us about decline and fall. They teach us that, nobody's guaranteed a place in the sun forever. But we also see stories of renewal and stories of better choices. And some of this might be because of the intervention of customers. It might be because of the intervention of competitors. It might be because of the intervention of government. Well, we've seen a great example, in Microsoft, which basically if you look at it from an evolutionary point of view, kind of grew because with the personal computer, there was this new inclusive opportunity for growth. Lots of people came swarming into this market. One company, figured out the rules of the new ecosystem better than others, became better adapted, came to dominate, and then squeezed all the life out of the ecosystem. And all of the entrepreneurial energy then moved over to the internet. And of course, we're watching the same, story recur. But then meanwhile, Microsoft went and reinvented itself. And I think it's a much more interesting, humane company. And that's sort of, in some sense, a metaphor for, the broader choices that we can make as an economy. There have been times when our economy is very inclusive, and then there becomes a time when it becomes extractive. Right now, I think we're actually in a fairly extractive period, and there's less opportunity. So if you look at the research of economist Raj Chetty at Stanford, he's been looking at what's the likelihood that children will be better off than their parents. And if you were born in 1970 versus 1940, you are now kind of entering the period where, this is sort of where they've got measured, so if you're, now, 50 years old, or approaching 50, you go, oh, you can see that they're actually less well off. Our economy is becoming less robust for most people. And that's exactly what happened. Again, part of what I try to do in my book is to have this crosstalk back and forth between what we learned from the history of technology platforms and what we learn about the economy. And right there, I go, okay, great. So that's exactly what happened to Microsoft. I predict it will happen to Google because I look at the stats on Google, and it's sort of a bit more of a slow motion consumption of its ecosystem than it was with Microsoft. But it's just as obvious. In 2004, Google got half of its revenue, nearly half, 49.5%, from advertising on third-party websites. It's down to 18%. Now, so Google has grown its own properties, far faster than it's grown the opportunity for other people on the web, which is exactly what happened in the PC industry with Microsoft. They basically took more of the value than they should have. It became a less robust ecosystem. Now, they've done some things that are very smart to counter that. For example, in the smartphone market, giving away Android and creating a lot of value for others kind of gave them a bridge into the new mobile ecosystem. So they kind of understand that creating value and not just capturing it is a secret of success. But I think they've also aren't clear enough about that. And part of what excites me about AI and effectively algorithmic systems is what they're really good at is taking more and more data into account to give better results. In the book, I spend some time, what do we learn from the history of Google search quality? And you look at the idea that they started with a couple of breakthrough insights that would give you better search results, things like PageRank, and then they also used, anchor text and a lot of the things that were already starting to be understood. But they've added hundreds of factors, including AI, which is now the Google Brain ranking is the third most important after PageRank and anchor text, or actually anchor text I think is still number one. People don't quite realize that. And and as a result, they continue to have pretty good search results, despite sort of fairly robust attacks on the system by spammers, by people who are trying to game the system. We also take the lesson that this is a constructed system. They are managing it. There are people managing the algorithms. And now you look at Facebook and you say, oh, they're now in the middle of a series of attacks on their algorithmic systems. And you also see the other problem with Facebook is that the objective function that they gave their algorithmic systems may have been incorrect. So they thought that showing people more of what they engaged with deeply would bring people together, and it turned out it could be used to drive them apart. Some of that was, attacks, by people trying to game the system and manipulate others, but some of it may be that they just had the wrong objective function. And I think there's a really interesting lesson here. They're sitting there going, how do we fix this? And what I try to do in the book by kind of telling these stories is then go to, okay, now look at our overall economy and how it is also an algorithmic system where we have told companies to optimize for share price with the theory that it would make everybody richer. And just as we see with Facebook, maybe they were wrong, because we see the hollowing out of the economy. We see the decrease in opportunity. We see the increase in inequality. We see all of the negative externalities that are being created as people are saying, oh, well, we're going to, sell, we're going to hack the system to sell opioids, sell more opioids, and go and devil take the hindmost as to what the consequences are. And I go, that's clearly a rogue objective function. And of course, that brings me to the big metaphor of the book that in some sense, we've already built the human hostile AI. the one that says humans are a cost to be eliminated. We don't have to look forward to some far future. We can say, oh, maybe there's a kind of hybrid AI combined of humans and machines, and it also has this problem that Nick Bostrom originally identified of, this runaway objective function where you tell the machine to optimize. Yeah, the paperclip optimizer, or Elon Musk's, a strawberry picking robot that eventually decides that humans are in the way of strawberry fields forever. We built one of those. It's this massive system where all of the incentives are get rid of people, treat them as a cost to be eliminated. And I think that we have to actually rein in and debug that system in the same way that we're asking Facebook to rein in and debug the system that they built.
The company you haven't mentioned yet, but is a centerpiece in your book, is Amazon. And Amazon, what I think distinguishes it from the other companies you've mentioned so far is it has been augmentative to both people in the technology industry and people outside of it. So in the technology industry, it's responsible for the massive boom in the lowering cost of technology companies because of AWS. And I think people, it's very easy to forget that. People sometimes do forget that how influential AWS has been, but also just the fact that it's such a massive employer of low-skilled labor. It's augmentative for low-skilled laborers. Why are there not more enterprises that manage to be augmentative to the low-skilled labor class? Because this seems like something that we would need to bridge that gap. I mean, putting aside the AI question for a second, just sticking to the first question around the income inequality stuff, if you can augment the skills of low-skilled workers, that seems like a valuable opportunity.
Well, the other company I talk a lot about in the book that does that is Uber, or Uber and Lyft. They are also using technology to augment workers so that they can do things that you couldn't do before. I mean, if when you think about the street hail aspect of taxis, you go, well, anybody could do that, but how? It's like now you can actually be summoned by the app, but more than that, anybody can be a driver because there's an app that knows how to get from anywhere to anywhere. And so you think right here is an augmentation technology. I think that Silicon Valley, though, well, first of all, there's two things that are wrong. One is that we focus too much on, some of the negatives of these jobs, that they're, for example, not great jobs. Same thing true of Amazon warehouse jobs, without recognizing that they can get better over time. And in fact, that's what we should be shooting for. We shouldn't be trying to go back to the old ways. We should say, how do we get our values expressed in these new ways? But also, we need to be looking at, well, how do these same technologies augment higher and higher opportunities? So a great example of this that I point to at the very end of the book is a company called Zipline. They are using on-demand drone delivery to reinvent healthcare in countries that don't have a well-developed healthcare infrastructure. So they are now. I mean, Keller Ronaudo, the founder, was telling me they know that they have saved in the last couple of years, the last 2 years, 1,600 lives in Rwanda. That's a small country where they started. They just signed a deal, I believe, or they're on the brink of signing deals in the Philippines, in Ghana, in 4 or 5 other countries, and they're running some pilots even here in the U.S. So here's this opportunity to do something that was previously impossible. And you can really see it in this international context. The old way was, okay, you're going to have, in order to be able to do transfusions. And what they started with was literally the leading cause of female mortality in Rwanda was postpartum hemorrhage. And you go, okay, you don't have the infrastructure for there to be blood everywhere in the country, because it means you have to have a fairly big blood bank to have all the rare blood types. And they go, oh, we can and there's bad roads, and you just can't get it to people in the old way. And they go, but we can get it to them in the new way. And so, and then, of course, that builds a new workforce where they've got, again, this is still a small company, but hundreds of people who are drone engineers, who are drone operators, who are, running the airfields where they're basically doing these deliveries of blood and critical medicines. And it really is a beautiful story of why I use this term WTF, because, that WTF the first time you see something kind of fades away.
Right.
And I use the analogy, there's this great quote from Tom Stoppard, the playwright, where he talks about a unicorn, and it's at first it's incredibly magical, and then it becomes, as he says, as thin as reality. More and more people see it, and you go, oh, that's just the way it is. And Keller's like totally clear about that. Like if you're in Rwanda and you see a drone flying overhead and dropping a little package, you take it for granted. Oh yeah, they're delivering blood, or they're delivering medicine, and it's just like, and that to me is real progress. And we do these things that used to be impossible, and we come to take them for granted. And anyway, I think there's so much more opportunity. And when I think about, kind of the design pattern, as I like to say, of the 21st century, it's to use technology not to replace people, but to augment them so they can do things that were previously impossible. And, think about all the great tech companies, Google enabling us to have access to all the world's information. That didn't used to be possible, and now it is. Mm-hmm. We take for granted our ability to communicate with people all over the world. We are now increasingly have an infrastructure where products from all over the world can be, sold and exchanged. It's kind of astonishing. I don't think a lot of people know the scale of the Amazon store. And I assume same thing is true of Alibaba in China. There are 600 million unique SKUs, stock keeping units, unique products in Amazon US, about 3 billion unique SKUs worldwide. So imagine, that we have a store with 3 billion SKUs, hundreds of millions of customers who can really get pretty much anything.
Yeah.
And again, that's enabling commerce. Yes, it's putting some people out of work in small stores, although I think that the evidence is that the number of jobs lost in retail is actually outstripped by the number of jobs that are created in delivery and in warehousing. There's actually been more jobs created by e-commerce than destroyed. The problem, for a society is that those jobs are in different places. And so, the lumpiness of the future is actually more of a problem in some sense than the absolute value of what is being created.
Right. So lumpiness meaning the radical difference in value accrued to the people who are the providers of these services versus...
Well, that's one kind of lumpiness, but it's also just lumpiness about where the jobs are, for example. I do think, again, there's some really interesting work by Michael Mandel at the Progressive Policy Institute, where let me put this as a broader economic theory where they talk about the history of what they call frontier firms, companies that, one of the drivers of increased wages is that some companies become way more profitable than others. And over time, they end up paying their people more. And this has happened with, automobiles, happened with, energy companies, and it's happening with tech. And they're just kind of pointing out that even, over time, it's not just the machine learning engineers at Amazon or the top programmers, it's actually wages are rising for all the people, including at the warehouses. And the theory is that over time, we're actually going to see these jobs get better. Now, we'll see whether that's the case. I do think one of the problems that I talk about quite a bit in the book is that we have built a system with a set of incentives that tell companies to pay people less. Because of this rogue objective function that says increase your stock price, that's how you will win. Align the incentives for your executives with this overriding objective function. We've created a situation where companies are incentivized to share less with their employees, and we have an economic theory that says some people are worth paying enormous amounts of money to, and some people are disposable. And I think we actually need to understand that that our goal in an economy can't be a winner-takes-all goal. And it can't be, some people get incredibly outsized gains and other people get next to nothing.
At Software Engineering Daily, we have user data coming in from so many sources. Mobile apps, podcast players, our website, and it's all to provide you our listener with the best possible experience. And to do that, we need to answer key questions like what content our listeners enjoy, what causes listeners to log out or unsubscribe, or to share a podcast episode with their friends if they liked it. And to answer these questions, we want to be able to use a variety of analytics tools, such as Mixpanel, Google Analytics, and Optimizely. If you have ever built a software product that has gone for any length of time, eventually you have to start answering questions around analytics, and you start to realize there are a lot of analytics tools. Segment allows us to gather customer data from anywhere and send that data to any analytics tool. It's the ultimate in analytics middleware. Segment is the customer data infrastructure that has saved us from writing duplicate code across all of the different platforms that we want to analyze. Software Engineering Daily listeners can try Segment free for 90 days by entering SE Daily into the How Did You Hear About Us box at signup. If you don't have much customer data to analyze, Segment also has a free developer edition. But if you're looking to fully track and utilize all the customer data across your properties to make important customer-first decisions, definitely take advantage of this 90-day free trial exclusively for Software Engineering Daily listeners. And if you're using cloud apps such as MailChimp, Marketo, Intercom, AppNexus, Zendesk, you can integrate with all of these different tools and centralize your customer data in one place with Segment. To get that free 90-day trial, sign up for Segment at segment.com and enter SE Daily in the How Did You Hear About Us box during signup. Thanks again to Segment for sponsoring Software Engineering Daily and for producing a product that we needed. I hear you vacillating between these two sides of the optimistic case for the future and the pessimistic case for the future. I mean, in each of your answers, you've vacillated.
I don't consider it vacillation. I consider it, there are these two alternatives that we are choosing between.
Yes. Okay, sure. So the two core problems that you've mentioned, I think, are the AI objective function, or maybe you can bucket that with the economic problematic 1980s mentality.
Sure, they're the same thing.
Objective function. And then the other problem is, okay, we've got dramatic disparity in sectors of the economy who are, making dramatically different amounts of money, which translate to dramatically different realities, dramatically different perspectives on where this present is taking us, which future this present is taking us towards. So you're involved in a lot of different areas where you could be mending that future, that gap in the equality. And I think one of those is education. Obviously, through O'Reilly, produce so many educational materials, some of them free, many of them free. And I know you're heavily involved in government. We're at Code for America right now. And I'm also curious about your perspective on alternative methods of income redistribution, the UBI stuff. What are in the optimistic case that we're able to make this work, that we're able to avert the Great Roman Collapse 2.0, what is it going to take? What are the different policies? What are the different things that tech companies are going to need to do? What are the strategies that we need for the optimistic case to work out?
Well, I think first off, we really need to reject these ideas that took hold in the 80s of basically if you optimize for the winners, everyone will become prosperous. The trickle down idea. We need to understand. I think as my friend Nick Hanover said, we all do better when we all do better. And we actually had that there was a period of prosperity where that was in fact the philosophy that governed government policy and economic policy. Was like, we want people to be working. We want it's sort of interesting. There's just this historical seesaw that you see. We had the 20s, which was a greed is good period, led to a Great Depression and a World War, and then we went, oh, whoa, we really screwed up. We have to actually have a much more inclusive economy. We have to invest in people. You think about the GI Bill here at home and the Marshall Plan in Europe, the equivalent in Japan, the rebuilding of the world after World War II that made us all prosperous. And then we kind of went, we started to get inflation. And then we said, we'll make this big correction, because our economy is getting inefficient. And we're due for another correction. And I think one of the things that tech teaches us is at the scale and speed of the modern world, it's not a matter of a big correction every 50 years. We need to have continuous, monitoring and feedback loops. And that's kind of what I've been trying to, raise as an issue for government is how do you have, delivery-driven policy in the same way we have delivery-driven, development, in tech. We sit there and we try things and we test and if they work, we do more of them. If they don't work, we stop doing it. There's new changes in the environment, either competition or people trying to game the system. We go, we have to adapt. So there's this continual complex adaptive system in modern apps. Whereas government is, sort of kind of fire and forget. We're still operating on policies that we may have developed 70, 80 years ago. And maybe we've kind of added more, we've doubled down on them, we've tweaked them a little bit, but we haven't really, reinvented government. And I think that there's a real opportunity to take the lessons of tech and to say, how would we do some of the things that, if we said, what's our objective to make, we want to make a prosperous economy that's got opportunity for all. What would we do differently if we were starting over today?
Well, the GSA stuff and Mikey Dickerson and all the stuff that went on under Obama, that seems like cause for optimism on it. If we take a time horizon beyond the current administration, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to be clear, my wife, Jen Palka, started the United States Digital Service. That was why she went to the Obama White House. It was basically, this idea, and, she was basically, originally Todd Park had started something called the Presidential Innovation Fellows, which was modeled on the Code for America Fellowship. And then he wanted Jen to come run it. And she said, no, I want to do something like what the UK is doing with the UK Government Digital Service. That is, you need to have an elite core of tech people. So she went and developed the framework for that and 18F. And then, of course, the healthcare.gov crisis is what brought the political will to actually do it, But we've been continuing to work on that. And yes, it is incredibly hopeful. The United States Digital Service is continuing even under Trump. And it's kind of amazing. Mikey left at the end of the Obama administration, but Matt Cutts of Google, went and took over the role. Now, of course, he agreed originally when everybody thought that it was going to be Hillary was going to be the next president. And it took a lot of guts to say, I'm going to stick this out. And, because he realized that, look, getting veterans benefits is not a political issue.
Right.
Getting, the social services to work is not a political issue. And so, service delivery is a big part of what government does, well below the political layer. In fact, you can make the case that, one of the reasons why people have lost faith in government and keep saying, well, we should just shrink it, is because it's not doing a very good job at a lot of things. And if we could actually make government work better, people would be more willing to pay their taxes. They'd be more willing to support programs. And to do that, government has to have these new tools that we have to understand in real time, are things working or not?
Yeah.
And there's so much that, we feel excited about that tech can teach government. At the same time, my wife, Jen Palka, who started Code for America, likes to say, we also need to bring the values of government to tech. That is, the values that we are trying to build something that works for everyone. Because what is unique about government is it's an institution that, when it works well, is effectively trying to manage the platform and the society for the benefit of everyone. Now, that's sort of anathema to a lot of people. They like to say, oh, no, the free market is what we're depending on. And I just call bullshit on that. First off, it isn't a free market. It's got rules. And those rules are tilted one way or the other to affect the outcomes. We tell people we're going to give you this, we're going to charge you this much tax for this kind of thing. You think about, there's a lot of incentives for making financial investments. There's a lower tax rate than there is on paying people. Anyway, there's a lot of design in the system. We have things like, we're going to favor housing with tax breaks. We're going to favor, this huge amount of tax nipping and tucking and shaping of the economy in the same way that Google shapes its search algorithms. And here's the thing, that we now can do those things way better than we did before. We sit there and when we look at, this idea of the more free the market, the better, that's looking at the contrast between, really bad experiments in the 30s and 40s in Russia and China, in the 50s of, centralized control. And what actually happens today? I look at the information market enabled by Google, for example, and you tell me that that's a free market. It's a centrally managed marketplace. Google's algorithms decide what things show up on the first page of results, right? It's not the market. Google is actually managing that. It's a centrally planned economy. And it's centrally planned, and it works because Google is using data to actually say, what are people really looking for? So they're kind of, in some sense, replicating what we traditionally think of as the coordinating role of independent, free markets by taking much, much more data into account. And I think one of the things that we failed to understand, when we kind of look at the sort of what I like to call today the Adam Smith marketplaces of people exchanging goods and services largely on a local or regional basis, where price signaling was a principal coordinating function, but also you had a lot of visibility, into who you were buying from. You knew them, perhaps. There was sort of a lot of trust signals and so on. And then you look at these modern global marketplaces where there are vast information asymmetries that can be exploited by players who have much more information. So the financial price signaling aspect is actually much less effective because those signals can be gamed and controlled by players with a lot of financial power. And meanwhile, you start to see these evolution of these new marketplaces. And this is one of the things I think a lot of people haven't recognized about Google and Facebook because they make so much money. They go, oh, well, that's the market, right? They go, no, actually, the actual content exchange market of both Facebook and Google, of people producing content and consuming content, is kind of independent of the price signaling. The price signaling market, the advertising market, is a sidebar market that gets attached on. It's a sidecar, that's attached to this market that's coordinated by non-price signals, by non-economic signals. Google says, well, we can take hundreds of factors into account to figure out what people are really looking for when they say the Engineering Today podcast. Or Software Engineering Daily, rather. Sorry.
That's all right.
Presumably the AI probably would recognize, actually, he really meant Software Engineering Daily, right? So here's this, this centrally managed and created and curated set of algorithms that are matching up people with what they're looking for. Same thing, with Amazon. It's like when you have 600 million products, we're not all looking at the same store. Amazon's algorithms are deciding, well, what are you really looking for? What are you most likely to buy? And, and it's dynamic and it's unique for everyone. And so I think there's some fundamental changes in the nature of the economy that we haven't fully understood. And I'm really enamored of this idea, this phrasing that came from a guy named Paul Cohen. He's the dean of the Information Sciences School at Pitt. We were both at a meeting on AI at the National Academies in Washington, D.C. And he said something beautiful. He said, the opportunity for AI is to help humans model and manage complex interacting systems. And I think that is is a kind of a beautiful summation. You think effectively the job and the opportunity of AI is to help us build better markets. Google is a marketplace that's designed and managed by people. Facebook is a marketplace that's designed and managed by people. Amazon is a marketplace that's designed and managed by people. The Apple App Store. And they've created a space where there can be a market with lots of contributors, but it is, in fact, centrally managed and coordinated by these algorithmic systems. And so I say, let's take those lessons to government and say, okay, government has to get better at managing the systems that it is effectively creating the infrastructure for.
I want to shift the topic completely to something more microcosmic. So your company, O'Reilly, is a private company, and that stands in stark contrast to the public companies that we've been discussing. Nonetheless, your company's been super successful. What are the pros and cons of a private company in contrast to a public company?
Well, I guess there's 2 or 3 different axes that you have to look at. And the first one is, let me actually just talk about a financialized company rather than a public or private.
Okay.
That's a different distinction. Because you can have a startup, for example, that from day one is financialized,
right,
even though it's not.
Cash flow positive meaning?
Yeah, what I mean by financialized is its fundamental product is the price of the company. That's a financialized company. When you have a startup and your goal is to increase the valuation all the way out to IPO, right? The product you are fundamentally making is the price of the company.
I see what you're saying.
Right? Whereas I literally have an old-fashioned Adam Smith company.
You do, yes.
I make stuff, or we make stuff.
Yeah.
We sell it to people who say, oh, I want that, and they pay us for it. Whether
right,
it's a book, whether it's an event, whether it's our online subscription service, Safari, people pay us for the stuff we create.
Yes.
And we make our money on the spread between what it costs us to make it. And that's the way the whole economy used to work. Now, if you look at the startup economy, it's kind of it's a microcosm of the broader public market economy, which is it's a betting economy. And in some sense, I don't really go this far in the book, and maybe I should have. It's a sign that we are actually, we've commoditized so much of the Adam Smith economy. That is, most of what we make can be made really cheaply, and it is a commodity. So humans are always looking for a way to make something new valuable. There's this thread that runs through the book. I talk about it in 4 or 5 different contexts. Clay Christensen called it the law of conservation of attractive profits. That is, when one thing becomes a commodity, something else, usually something adjacent, becomes valuable. And, so in some sense, as we meet more of the, day-to-day needs of people in the economy, we build things that people don't really need, but maybe they just want. Actually, Samuel Johnson, the famous, 19th century author, once wrote about this wonderful passage in his little novel Rascal. He said, his character says, "I consider the pyramids to be a monument to the insufficiency of all human enjoyments. He who is built for use till use is supplied must begin to build for vanity." And so you think about, how much of our economy is now stuff that you don't really need, but that you want, whether it's fashion, whether it's entertainment, or whether it's, my startup's worth more than yours. And in some sense, way too many startups, I think, are being built. I mean, there's sort of a good part of all that where it's like, if you really see it as, startups are kind of like movies, and VCs are kind of like movie studios.
Yeah.
And entrepreneurs are kind of like movie stars. Then you go, okay, I get what it is. It's an entertainment economy, and we're creating products, and, Snap is like Mission Impossible. You go, oh, great. Okay, I know what it is. I know what I'm getting into. But if you think that, what we haven't really figured out, which, and in those things, it's like just being popular gets you a valuation. Neither Twitter nor Snap has ever made $1 of real profit, where their actual, revenues were greater than their costs. And then there are other companies, like,
They get super money though,
Google,
right?
they do. They've got what I call, call it in the book super money, So they get this huge.
Do you ever wonder what could O'Reilly be if we had super money?
Well, I've thought about it many times, and part of it is, first of all, it's a winner takes all game. And, it's sort of a betting market game. And I've been around a lot of companies and watched them come and go. And everybody kind of focuses on the winners without thinking about the losers. And, I think for every, company that, is a big winner in this, gamble to be of perception, for people to be betting on you for the future, there are a lot of losers. And so I guess I said, well, look, I think there's a slow and steady way to win. And then there's this high return, high risk way to win. The problem with the high risk, high return way is, I think a lot of times it's kind of a fraud. I hate to use that word, and a lot of people will hate me in Silicon Valley for it, but it's not that dissimilar from if you don't actually have a real business in mind that will actually produce revenue and profits in the end.
Yes,
you're preying on people, just like the people on Wall Street who were selling these packaged up mortgages in 2006, 2007, leading to this big crash. Because in the end, a Google, for example, which is a real company, people are betting on its future, and the bet pays off.
Yeah.
Right. People are betting on Amazon, and the bet pays off. Right. Amazon's a little different. It's sort of interesting. One of the things I've been doing as an exercise since I wrote the book is actually looking at how far along are we to the bet paying off by looking at the market cap of a company or of the wealth of the founders versus the what they would have if they were a private company. So like for me, I look at my effectively my net worth is a product of, well, what are the retained earnings of my company over 40 years? How much did we make? And I don't necessarily all have it personally, but if I sold the company, I could realize the difference between, what's in the company and maybe I could sell it in some other way, but there's sort of a set of dollars that have accumulated.
Yeah.
And, you really see it vividly. I've been looking at the contrast between Google and Amazon. Jeff Bezos currently worth $144 billion in the stock market. He now owns something like, I can't remember whether he's down to 19% of the company ownership. But anyway, I just sort of tracked over the years since they went public. If he had just simply got his share of the company's retained earnings, that is its share of its profits, he'd be worth $1.5 billion. So he has 100 times as much wealth as he would have just as a share of the actual dollars that his company made. And so you kind of go, will that ever equalize out? I think it will, but it will equalize out because Amazon will come down from a couple of 100 times earnings down to a more reasonable number. Like Facebook and Google, are not that far ahead of the S&P 500 now. I think Google's 26 times and Facebook's 29 times its earnings. And because of that, you kind of go, okay, so what that means is, over a period of 20 years, if you bought the stock and the stock is a claim on the earnings, effectively the stock will earn out, as opposed to, well, you place this bet and you managed to cash out before the greater fool didn't realize that it was going to crash. So Google, Larry and Sergey probably are already halfway there to having really earned their wealth, through the actual profits of their company. Yes. Jeff is has achieved 1% of his actual wealth.
Sure. So
now again, it's not to say these companies also demonstrate, particularly Amazon. Google didn't need that much capital to get to profitability, whereas Amazon needed a great deal of capital to get to profitability. And that's how financial markets should work. They should be, when you need capital to build a future, that's what they should be good for. But instead, we're spending a lot of that capital just making a lot of people rich for companies that fail, that get acquired, that don't go anywhere. And, I trace in my book a little bit how that happened with AOL. AOL went all the way up to $240 billion in market cap. partly based on a set of fake news in some sense about we're an internet company. And they weren't. They were a dial-up company, and they weren't actually an internet company, but they rode the internet wave, and then they crashed back down to 20 billion. So they created, some value, but they were able to sell, on this hype wave of the internet, able to sell themselves as way bigger than they were. And I look at that with Uber, for example, and, self-driving cars. I kind of make reference to this in the book, that Uber's investments in self-driving cars were kind of fake news. Hey, we'll be a way stronger business in the future because we'll get rid of those pesky, expensive drivers, so value us more highly now, right? And the fact is, that's the kind of sort of perception engineering that we see in an overly financialized market.
You listen to this podcast to raise your skills. You're getting exposure to new technologies and becoming a better engineer because of it. Your job should reward you for being a constant learner. And Hired helps you find your dream job. Hired makes finding a new job easy. On Hired, companies request interviews from software engineers with upfront offers of salary and equity, so that you don't waste your time with a company that is not going to value your time. Hired makes finding a job efficient, and they work with more than 6,000 companies, from startups to large public companies. Go to hired.com/SEdaily and get $600 free if you find a job through Hired. Normally, you get $300 for finding a job through Hired, but if you use our link, hired.com/SEdaily, you get $600, plus you're supporting SE Daily. To get that $600 signing bonus upon finding a job, go to hired.com/SEdaily. Hired saves you time, and it helps you find the job of your dreams. It's completely free. And also, if you're not looking for a job, but you know someone who is, you can refer them to Hired and get a $1,337 bonus. You can go to hired.com/SEdaily and click Refer a Friend. Thanks to Hired for sponsoring Software Engineering Daily. So, your company, O'Reilly, established a durable competitive advantage over time, and along that path, you also did do some speculative things that worked out. So you had a skunkworks, you actually started a company spun off a company called the Global Network Navigator, which was out of this skunkworks project, you sold it to AOL for, I think, $11 million.
It's actually 15 by the time.
15
anyway, whatever, plus some stocks. Yeah, anyway.
Yeah, so it was like great outcome, skunkworks project. O'Reilly
By the way,
has
$50 million in 95 was a lot more money than it is today. Yeah.
Of course, absolutely. What I wonder is, have you continued to do skunkworks things, and how have you felt over time, over the last 40 years, about the durable, cash flow positive business and just focusing and sticking to your knitting as opposed to trying to do skunkworks things, speculative things, moonshot projects that might be more native to a company like a Google or an Amazon that have super money and they can sort of throw money at, anyway, you understand that.
I guess what I would say is you pick the hat to fit the head, and there's some things that this has a business model, just keep turning the crank. There's other things you don't know if you have a business model. And, so like with GNN, there were a couple of things there. We were like very early in the web. It was the very first commercial website, launched in 1993. It was the first advertising on the web. And we had a lot to prove. And we got a few years into it, and we saw the web taking off, and I said, I'm going to have to take in a lot more money. Actually, I read a book called Marketing High Technology by Ron Davidow, and he basically had an appendix where he talked about the math of market domination, and it's what convinced me to sell. He said, look, in order to dominate a market, you have to be at least half the market and growing faster than the market as a whole. And I looked at the web and I said, there's no way I can do that without taking in a lot of money. And I don't want to do that because in my consulting days, I'd been around a lot of startups and I watched them go from being really interesting places to places that I didn't want to be anymore. And I wanted to keep O'Reilly independent, so I spun it out. And, we sold it to AOL and watched them promptly tank it because they didn't really believe in the internet, even though they said they did, And, and over the years, we've spun out a number of other technology projects and sold them. We started an early venture firm and have done some very useful investments. And we've had some wins. We were the first investor in Blogger, which we sold to Google, Ev's first company. We, for example, and again, it was one of these things where it very nearly went out of business, but managed to get rescued. And, blogging went on to become quite important, although Google didn't do much with Blogger. And I guess I'd just say I have a mix, we were the first investor in Planet Labs, for example, Planet now it's called, which is microsatellites. And, here's a company that requires capital. It launches satellites, which cost money. And, it's been years to build this, a global network to image the surface of the Earth every day. That's what financial markets are good for. We could never have done that, without speculative capital. But on other things, you kind of go, but I also, some of it's just inclination. I think the main thing is to be focused on the value that you are creating. Because if you are creating value, then you say, oh, is this a better, and when I say value, I mean real customer value, not, oh, I can get some greater fool to give me money for this thing and I can sell it. And I watch, companies, the companies I'm looking at today, some of them are competitors. And I go, yeah, you managed to go public, losing a couple $100 million.
Competitors to O'Reilly, you're saying?
Yeah, where they're spending money, for customer acquisition. And you really look at the business and you go, that's a crappy business. It's not sustainable, but they're managing to get through to a financialized exit. Now, maybe they can now turn it into a real business, but, we're in bubble times, when you can have, businesses that are getting 50 cents on the dollar that they spend, go public, because, hey, that's not real business. That's just appearances. And again, the part of the thing is that people don't understand that there's some businesses where scale sticks. And there's other businesses where scale doesn't stick.
There are a lot of headwinds in the industry that you're in. The developer marketing, there's tons of developers. The market size is obviously growing. You've got developing markets. What are the biggest changes that you foresee for the O'Reilly media business in the near future?
Yeah, well, I mean, the biggest changes that we're really betting on is we've shifted a lot of emphasis. There's really three legs to the stool today. There's our original business, which was book publishing. It's now the smallest part of our business. Then there's events, which is the next largest, and then there's our online platform, which is the largest. And so, we're placing a big bet on the online learning platform. It is, in fact, a marketplace play, because we're not the only provider. We're both a provider of content from our book publishing and our events business, feed content in, but we have hundreds of other publishers and other types of content providers. We see that sort of on-demand learning marketplace being, an incredibly important part of the future of how developers learn and just in general how companies do continuous training and upskilling of their employees. So, we've already placed a huge bet on that as the future of our business. And I think we have some real advantages there. I mean, there's a lot of people who are doing video training, for example, and we have, because we have, books are really good for, I need some really in-depth answer that's been vetted, but we also have a lot more, we also go all the way through because of our experience with events and live training. We do online live training. And so we kind of have a sort of a comprehensive set of offerings. The other thing I would say, and this is one that we have not, fully grokked, and that is this idea of upskilling that we've talked about with regard to Uber or Amazon warehouse workers. And that is where the intelligence really resides, in the machine itself, and humans in partnership with the machine. And we, quite frankly, it's something I've thought about for 20, 30 years. How does that apply to our business? And it's going to, one day somebody's going to do it, and I'm going to slap myself on the forehead and go, why couldn't we see that? But that augmentation, and again, we know some of it. You look at modern developer tools, and how much they assist you in coding correctly. You look at all the tools for sort of version control and sharing, and that's all developer augmentation. You look at, we spend a lot of time thinking about, things like Jupyter Notebooks as a way of delivering, learning and content more effectively. And those are also examples of how you can augment people and augment the kinds of ways that we share information with each other.
You're talking about upskilling non-developers, right?
Well, both. In some sense, if you think about, like an upskilling technology, desktop publishing, meant that anybody could publish a good-looking document.
Sure.
And, Jupyter Notebook is an upskilling technology because it means you can publish a document with the data that goes with it, in a way that, or the model that goes with it. And so it's real advance in publishing, and knowledge transmission. And I think that's important. But we still haven't really seen the kind of knowledge on demand. When I think of, the metaphor of where, we all need to be converging on, it's a little bit like the scene in The Matrix where Neo asks Trinity, about the helicopter. Do you know how to fly that? And she says, not yet.
Right.
And of course, that's what we all want. You go, do you know how to do
TensorFlow?
Yeah, you know how to do TensorFlow. You go, not yet, and you download the information. And in some ways, of course, we are there because, the ability to sort of package up and containerize, and, those are all elements of this kind of superpower that we're building around development, where you can be more powerful, and you can quickly get access to new skills, new capabilities. The fact that, you no longer have to build your AI models from scratch. That there's pretty powerful tools available from the cloud platforms. These are all ways of developer upskilling. And, and I think for us, part of it is understanding which of those things, are most appropriate for people. Interesting new book I'm reading right now called Prediction Machines. And it's actually one of the best books I've read on the application of AI to business. And it kind of makes the point that, look, stop talking about AI. Just talk about these things are machines that are good at prediction. You give them some data and they, kind of say, well, this is what this data predicts. And you say, well, what becomes valuable, in a world where this prediction is cheaper? And they kind of go, well, it's judgment. It's the judgment. What do you ask? What are the questions that you're going to ask? When you get a bunch of predictions, are they good predictions or not? And again, you look at that ability, effectively debugging in some sense becomes senior to programming in that world. I love this phrase. It's one of these things I've regretted. I didn't use it in my book. It was because after the book went to press, I remembered a conversation I'd had, 30 years ago with Andrew Singer. It was early in the company's history. We were working on documentation. And it was probably maybe 1987 or 88. I was writing the manual for a product called Lightspeed C, which was the first C compiler for the Mac. Andrew had a company called Think Technologies. It later became called Think C due to a trademark problem. Andrew said something that sort of stuck with me, and it came back recently. And it was like, the skill of debugging is figuring out what you really told your program to do instead of what you thought you told it to do. And you think about it, that's what Facebook is doing right now. They've got this vast prediction machine that says, if I show you more of this, you're going to, look at it, And now they're going, oh, well, is it doing what we really thought it was doing? They're realizing there were all these consequences. And that's really what this book, Prediction Machines, is talking about. It's like, oh, in a world with increased prediction, the key skill is actually understanding whether the predictions did what we thought they were going to do. And that's something that I think is something we all really have got to come to grips with. We are, in some sense, you probably remember in the early days of the web when everybody went nuts over you could make things blink, and then there was color and all this kind of crap, and then we kind of had this sort of, design renaissance. And we're kind of approaching that moment with AI because we're realizing that we can do all this stuff and we're doing it wrong in some way. We're making bad predictions and just accepting them. It's everything from the bad predictions, based on, sentencing algorithms in criminal justice to, Facebook's algorithms to whatever. And it's exactly as this book points out, what's really becomes valuable again is, our human judgment to evaluate, and again, I love Andrew's phrasing, is the system we're building, is it doing what we actually wanted to do?
Tim O'Reilly, thanks for coming on Software Engineering Daily. It's been really great talking to you.
Fantastic to talk with you too. Thanks.
Okay, great. In today's fast-paced world, you have to be able to build the skills that you need when you need them. With Pluralsight's learning platform, you can level up your skills in cutting-edge technology, like machine learning, cloud infrastructure, mobile development, DevOps, and blockchain. Find out where your skills stand with Pluralsight IQ, and then jump into expert-led courses organized into curated learning paths. Pluralsight is a personalized learning experience that helps you keep pace. So get ahead by visiting pluralsight.com/sedaily for a free 10-day trial. And if you're leading a team, discover how your organization can move faster with plans for enterprises. Pluralsight has helped thousands of organizations innovate, including Adobe, AT&T, VMware, and Tableau. Go to pluralsight.com/sedaily to get a free 10-day trial and dive into the platform. When you sign up, you also get 50% off of your first month. And if you want to commit, you can get $50 off an annual subscription. Get access to all three, the 10-day free trial, 50% off your first month, and $50 off a yearly subscription at pluralsight.com/sedaily. Thank you to Pluralsight for being a new sponsor of Software Engineering Daily. And to check it out while supporting Software Engineering Daily, go to pluralsight.com/sedaily.
Wow.